Step out of line and here come the naysayers and the lawsuits to follow. So this really isn't much of a laughing matter, but at some point we have to look at society today and see what is being allowed to run forward and what is just being held back with all the strength in the world. Today I want to talk about SpaceX. So SpaceX is something really near and dear to my heart for a number of reasons, but it's also near and dear to my family's heart. So my son decided he was going to go watch it. So he grabbed a flight. He flew from California to Texas and got himself over there for the test, which was on Monday. And then, of course, the launch that happened on Thursday. It's just an incredible experience for a child to see that. And he looks at it as one firework in the sky. But there's a lot more behind the scenes that went into this. And from my perspective, there's a lot of questions that we have that will never be answered. But as we look forward, it was deemed a success. And what's interesting is this article actually is from January of 2021. It says Elon Musk SpaceX violated its launch license in explosive Starship test, triggering an FAA probe. Now, seriously, what does a launch license look like? It's got to be unique to every single organization and unique to every single launch. So I thought this was suspect at best. But as I talked about public policy on the last segment, we really need to look at what is the policy that even allowed somebody like a private citizen like Elon Musk to form SpaceX and compete against NASA. What kind of luck was on his side that that was even a possibility? You know, I was wondering though, and kind of from a comical perspective, but just intrinsically looking at this, what if you were in the waters around the island where the launch took place? What if you were in a fishing boat? What if the debris fell on you? Right? People talked about the fish being harmed and you know, other situations that could have occurred. And that's not okay either. But gravity brings stuff down. And if the reason that the rocket was brought down was to make sure that it wouldn't lose control, where are all the pieces? So what we're looking at is, it's really interesting because right after the launch, there was a series of articles that came out and I could not find one of them. In fact, I tracked down some of the screenshots that I had pulled, but there's not enough detail because, you know, when a journalist goes ahead and posts an article, it's assigned a URL. The URL is the URL for the story. And it usually has some keywords from the story that is created, usually the title specifically. And that's the header, the leader, right? This is where clickbait comes in, where the original story or the original header may have one concept or direction. And then later the story's changed. Sometimes it can be swapped out with something completely different. And they hope that you don't realize, because then you'll spend time on the site and keep going and keep, you know, spending more and more time there. Eyes on the page can generate interest. They think that once you click through, you forget why you were there. And quite honestly, many of us do. And yet the header stays. So you can always go back to the header and see what was the original article or original item. And often what we saw specifically over the last 3-4 years is that the story will have facts replaced, evolved, right? Outright lies come out of it. So the story that I was looking for was actually FFA opened an immediate investigation into SpaceX. And it was actually comical to me because it said that the FAA employees or agency, I can't remember how they phrased it, was going to do an investigation to see why the rocket went off course. And for me, that was very comical because how are you going to get a bunch of bureaucrats that by the nature are low paid, although the salaries can be higher? – These are not going to compete with a private entity. How are they going to come back to SpaceX and say, by the way, this is what was wrong with the launch, this is wrong with the propellant, this is wrong with the whatever the technical issue was? How is a bureaucratic agency going to come up with that? Well, it was a placeholder. And now every single article you go to has this slant. So here's the information. It says the FAA has grounded SpaceX Starship and Super Heavy program, the whole program, pending an investigation into the rocket's first launch on April 20th, which resulted in a mid-air explosion. A spokesperson for the FAA has said in a statement that an anomaly occurred during the ascent, which resulted in the explosion. And that's as close as I can get to what that original article was as it continued to it. But once we click on that, it's a totally different direction. And in fact, the article was exploring the explosion that happened. How did the explosion occur? Well, we all know how the explosion occurred. They detonated it. But of course, the reason for the investigation would be, why was it detonated? And why was it detonated? Because they were losing control. It was going off course and actually sliding back to Earth. And so they detonated to control it and make sure that it didn't land. But as we get to in the final page today, there's a lot more to look into on this one. Let's move forward a little bit here. So the articles are now switching the story from the naysayers to lawsuits. SpaceX Starship launch under FAA investigation after raining potentially hazardous debris on homes and beaches. Now, this is actually very, very serious. Of course, people get hurt by that. Could be a lot of damage. They said that windows broke. It was heard or felt more than 20 miles away. We do know that there was one van destroyed, which is kind of comical. It was within 1/4 mile of the launch pad where the surveillance was pushed out. People were not allowed to be within 4 miles. And debris from the rocket, from the launch pad, hit the van. And so that's lots of jokes around parking. In fact, I don't think it's in this one anymore here. But what we're looking at here, there's even articles, oops, SpaceX blew up its own launch pad and started a fire in a state park. Now, I don't know about the fire and equating that, but we do know that it blew up its own launch pad. In fact, Musk had come out and his team had stated that they were creating a different metal piece. And you would know the term, you've got more diligence on what's going on there. However, they were going to reinforce it, but it wasn't ready yet. And this is what happens when technology is moving forward so quickly and you're pioneering a field. Literally, with every step you're taking, you're having to build the road underneath your foot in order to then build another piece of the road to take another step. Was he going to wait for the pieces? No. You have to keep moving forward. He's planning to launch multiple rockets this year. And so he kept stepping ahead with or without the parts. In a sense, what they ended up with, a massive soil crater, as a majority of the concrete was just blown away. And yet again, this was deemed a huge success to launch this massive rocket off of the Earth and get it up at all into our sky. Now, the issue that they faced again is it started to go off course. There were some of the rocket engines didn't ignite. And so it went off course slightly, and it did some circles, and it kind of, as it was slowly falling back to Earth. So what's really interesting is when we walk through life, there's a lot of opportunities we have in order to meet other people and ask questions. And one theme that you're going to get from me throughout the conversations is the quality of the questions really are going to determine the quality of your life. Not just taking information for what it is, but actually participating in the conversation and understanding. So one of the conversations that I had when I worked for Google X was with an engineer who had come from SpaceX, and his job as an engineer, software engineer, right, a programmer, was to program the code so that they kept control of the rocket, and so it could not turn into a ballistic missile. Now, why would that even be a consideration? They knew they could get hacked. They knew that if they lost control, they had to figure out a way to not have that destroy a city. So as we go through the information that'll come out about this, we're seeing that although the successes are major, that's not really what's touted. But there are a lot of things to be discussed. And here we have from April of 2022, so a year ago, an aerospace engineer explained how hypersonic missiles work. Well, if you've got a rocket that you've launched and you lose control, what if it gets hacked? What if somebody else takes control of that rocket? As we know, this was an unmanned rocket. Now, I had heard that the Mission Control Center was in Hawthorne. That's what was announced. However, because of the size of the mission control room that they showed that Musk was in, that's not the typical launch auditorium that they have in Hawthorne. So more than likely, it was probably in Texas. But either way, it was not on the rocket itself. So we already know that this rocket can be and is being controlled, whether it's autonomously or remotely, and probably an overlap of both for security reasons. And yes, these can get hacked. They can turn into ballistic missiles, and they have to have a way to take control of that. And in this case, the control mechanism, and they had a 3-word acronym that blended into this, and I apologize, I haven't been able to find it again, as it was words that were made up in order to come up with a reason why from an engineering perspective. But essentially, they detonated the rocket so that it wouldn't turn into a ballistic missile. And we're very grateful that they have these mechanisms in place. So as we go back to the original release that came out about the FAA investigation, the original was not the investigation from environmental organizations suing the FAA for allowing the launch. The original investigation was it wasn't 100% successful from the FAA point of view, meaning the launch did not take the rocket up into a suborbit. It detonated. And before additional licenses could be issued, they needed to take their own experts to identify why it went off course in order for it to be have a need to be detonated. And to the FAA, I wish you good luck. I'm sure that Elon Musk is just really waiting for that solution. All right, you all have a good day today.